Good morning and welcome back to the reading of God's Word. And we end up this week as we begin the book of prophets. We're going to be looking at all 16 prophets. There's 4 majors and 12 minor prophets. And we begin in Isaiah, and in this video, we're going to look at the first 12 chapters of Isaiah. But for the moment, with Isaiah and Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel, those are the 4 major prophets, and they are very busy in their prophecies. A lot of it has to do with the current time that they're prophesying, and that would be the fall of the southern kingdom during the exile, and even later coming out of the exile, the promises of the restoration after that. Isaiah goes deep into a lot of discussion about the Millennial Reign. So we're going to be, as we read through Isaiah, it's going to be very busy, and it bounces back into just almost indiscriminately. In other words, he'll be talking about the judgment of Judah and the punishment to come, but he's going to talk right away. He's going to turn into the promises of judgment and, into forgiveness and restoration of the nation. And as we move through and we get through history, we'll find out, exactly how God is maneuvering through this and the punishment he's going to bring, how the 70 years of exile happened, as we get through all of these. We've already looked at Ezra, Nehemiah, and that was actually the coming out of that exile and the restoration at that point. But Isaiah is not there. He's prior to that. So Isaiah prophesied somewhere between 740 and 680 BC. Now this was after the fall of the northern kingdom, but he was very well aware of that. And Isaiah is pointing out to Judah, be careful, that northern kingdom gives you an example of what's going to happen. God is going to do you the same way if you're not very careful with this. And so he does not make it all the way to the fall of Judah, but he prophesies up through 4 different kings, beginning with Uzziah, and he goes all the way through Hezekiah, and Hezekiah's son Manasseh becomes king after him. Now, that period of time sort of ends up Isaiah, and tradition says that during the reign of Manasseh, that Isaiah was basically sawn in two. In other words, he was put into a plastic, or not plastic, but a cloth bag, stuffed into a log, and then the log was sawn in two with him in it. So that's tradition. That is not in the Bible, but there is a reference to that, by the way, in Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 37, as to that kind of an execution, being martyred that way. But by and large, we see Isaiah prophesying to Judah as a result of what happened to the northern kingdom and God's promise that it was going to happen to them as well. And it almost happened, really, during Isaiah's prophecies, as he was prophesying during the kingdom of Hezekiah. But Hezekiah had that prayer, and God he delayed that until way later on. And so that was basically some 75 years after Isaiah had died. So we've got that. Isaiah was giving these prophecies. So we're going to finish out, of course, looking at these different chapters 1 through 12. And we begin with chapters 1, 2, 3, and 5. And I say that, and I will omit 4, because 4 is a very short 6-verse chapter, but it deals directly with the Millennial Reign. All these other chapters, 1, 2, 3, and 5, are denunciations of Judah, and he gives them a blistering look at themselves compared to what was happening to the northern tribe. And so he's saying that, the same things that the Assyrians did to the northern tribes, look out, because it's coming to you as well. So he gives them warning, and we know God gives warnings. He doesn't act until he gives a warning. He talks over and over and over again, and he gives every opportunity for them to correct themselves. However, they're not going to do that, and we'll eventually get into the fall of Jerusalem, and that would be to the Babylonians, who would have already destroyed the Assyrians. And all this takes place basically in a lot of the prophecies in here. But we do see, again, where God promises. And, first of all, he's promising in all of this. Isaiah prophesies of the judgment and the punishment to come for disobedience. He also prophesies the promises of forgiveness and restoration all the way through this. So it's you'll jump from one to the other real fast in the same piece of scripture. It is unusual to read that, but we have to look at it that way. So that is 1 through 5, and in a different chapter 4 being just the millennial reign. But I would say in chapters 3 and 5, look at that kind of closely. You'll see 8 woes. There's 2 woes in chapter 3 and 5 woes in chapter 5. So as you read through that, see if you can pick out those woes in the denunciation or the accusation, really, of what Isaiah was talking about. Then we get to chapter 6, Isaiah chapter 6. This is an interesting chapter. This is where God gives Isaiah a vision. This is the commissioning of Isaiah. God gives him a vision of heaven. He goes up and he sees heaven, and what did he say? Woe am I am ruined, he said. He said, because my eyes have seen the King of the Lord of hosts. He said that he was a man of unclean lips, and he lived among a people of unclean lips. He could see then that God was giving him the energy and the confidence that these prophecies that he was going to be giving was, this is a serious God, and God, he could see this, he knew this. So God reinforced him with this vision of what I want you to do. It's kind of like God's talking to Jeremiah, and he said, and your forehead will be like flint. In other words, you're going to be hard-headed when you talk to these people. So Isaiah had to pretty much do the same thing. So in chapter 3, in chapter 6, we see Isaiah has received his commission. Who will go for us? They said. In Isaiah, here am I, send me. That's one of the most famous verses throughout all of Isaiah and the Bible. Here am I, send me. So we got that commissioning, and Isaiah goes off now after the denunciation of Judah. He's going to continue that over and over and over again. So God has a plan basically to destroy these nations and to destroy Israel, to the northern kingdom, the southern kingdom, but he also has a plan to bring them back. He is going to teach them all a lesson on this. So then, woven into all of these prophecies is the sign of the coming of the Messiah. It is the millennial reign and the righteousness by which he will rule. So chapters 7 through chapter 10, verse 4 is a very complex set of readings. He bounces off of what's going to happen, or the accusations, or the things that Judah is doing wrong. He also he'll turn right around and talk about the promise of the restoration and the millennial reign. So again, this is one of those strange ways to look at Isaiah, in you have to read it closely. And then but then we get into, he begins to looking at, the denunciation of the other nations. So you're going to read that. When you get in through 12 and beyond, you'll start seeing that not only is he using these prophecies against just Israel or just the northern and southern kingdom, but against each of the countries that are the kingdoms really that are involved. And he doesn't leave anybody unpunished. Chapters 10, verse 5, Isaiah sees God destroying Assyria by the Babylonians. And he also sees that future return of the Jews coming back. He sees basically after the exile that's coming back. He also sees the millennial reign with the Jews in there as well. But that would only happen. We had that after the 70 years of exile. This prophecy of this return basically is 150 years ahead of the event of that. So we've had 55 years of Manasseh. We had the 70 years. Well, there was some time after Manasseh as well, just a few kings. And then we had the exile itself, and then we had the return under Zerubbabel. Remember that discussion, and we came back in. So God, he's telling everybody this is what is going to happen, and of course it does. And then in chapter 11, we get to the point of the return of the rule of the branch of Jesse. Again, it is the discussion of the Messiah, Jesus the Messiah, coming back, and he is going to rule with peace on earth during that millennial reign. And this is where we kind of see that picture of the lion and the lamb laying together, which never does really. If you read it, it's a little different from that, but it is the peace between all of the creation. In other words, there's not going to be any death as far as violent death. Now, it also says that, a child will live to be 100 years old, and if he does not live to be 100 years old, he will be considered accursed. So there's a lot of discussion just in that, but by and large, there's going to be a lot of peace on earth during this millennial reign. And then chapter 12, of course, we end this up with actually a song. It is a song of praise, Isaiah writes, for the promise yet to be fulfilled. This song will move way into the future after the restoration of Israel and during the millennial reign. So Isaiah looks way out in front, and we're by it's not really confusion. It's just the dual way of reading this of his current situation and the current prophecies of the current day. And then the millennial side, he looks way out into the future, and you'll just have to be able to discern between those two events. A lot of it is dual in its nature. It's kind of a little bit difficult to read, but I'm sure you'll be able to pick it out. So with that, as we finish out here now this week and the first 12 chapters of Isaiah, I pray that God gives you the wisdom and understanding as you read it, and that you get a good beginning of this long book of prophecy written by Isaiah, and that I pray God blesses then the reading of his word.